A continent spans from the Gulf of Mexico to the Red River, larger than France. Houston sprawls across coastal plains where refineries light the night sky. Dallas rises from Blackland Prairie, where cotton once ruled. Along the Rio Grande, two nations press against each other across a border that has moved before. This land has flown 6 flags. Indigenous peoples, including the Caddo, Apache and Comanche, shaped it for millennia. Spanish missions followed in the 16th century. French explorers planted their claim briefly. Mexico governed after independence. For 9 years, it stood as its own republic. Then the United States absorbed it, and it seceded and returned. To reconstruct this transformation visually across centuries, this video uses AI-generated imagery based on historical research. The reconstructions are interpretative. Small inconsistencies may appear, but they allow us to see landscapes and settlements that photography never captured. The historical framework comes from documented sources. From bison herds that darkened the plains, through cotton fields worked by enslaved labour, to the 1901 oil strike that changed everything, to the modern economic powerhouse hosting 52 Fortune 500 companies. 6 flags, 1 territory. A story of how land changes hands and what remains beneath. Long before flags marked sovereignty, 3 worlds met in the lands that would become Texas. The territory stretched across a collision zone where southwestern pueblos, Mississippi Basin cultures, and Mesoamerican civilizations extended their furthest reaches. No empire claimed these vast grasslands, piney forests, and desert mountains. Instead, dozens of distinct peoples adapted to environments as different as any continent could offer. The name itself speaks to one of these nations. Texas derives from Tisha, a word in the Caddo language meaning friend. Spanish explorers heard it from the Hasinai Confederacy, agricultural peoples who built their world along the Red, Sabine, and Neches rivers. In the northeastern woodlands, Caddo communities raised ceremonial mounds above the floodplains. Maize grew in cleared bottomlands. Trade routes connected them to the mound-building cultures of the Mississippi Valley, where Cahokia's influence still echoed centuries after its peak. To the west, different worlds prevailed. Athabascan speaking peoples ranged across interior plains that would later bear their name, the Apache. Along the Rio Grande, Humano and Puebloan groups maintained connections to the adobe architecture and spiritual practices of the Southwest. Their universe looked toward the mesas and cliff dwellings, not the eastern forests. The Gulf Coast supported its own distinct cultures. Ku-Rankawa bands moved seasonally along barrier islands and marshes, their lives shaped entirely by tides and storms. Atacopan, peoples occupied the wetlands where rivers met saltwater. These coastal nations developed knowledge systems built on maritime rhythms, foreign to the plains hunters or river farmers. Between these regions, other peoples carved territories from specific niches. Tankuwa bands roamed central grasslands. Wichita communities established themselves in the north. Language isolates and families overlapped. Coahuil, Tecan speakers in the south, Uto-Aztecan dialects near the western deserts. Each group understood the land through generations of inherited knowledge about water sources, migration patterns, plant seasons, and shelter sites. This was Texas before the word existed, a geography defined not by boundaries but by the convergence of worlds that rarely touched elsewhere. In 1519, Spanish ships traced the Gulf Coast for the first time. Alonso Alvarez de Pineda mapped a shoreline that stretched for hundreds of leagues, noting river mouths and barrier islands, but finding no cities of gold. The coastline entered Spanish charts, yet the interior remained unknown. 9 years later, a Spanish expedition bound for Florida met disaster off the Texas coast. Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca washed ashore among peoples who had never seen Europeans. He spent 8 years moving between coastal groups, learning languages, observing customs, surviving. When he finally reached Spanish settlements in Mexico, his accounts described vast plains and scattered peoples, but no quick wealth to justify conquest. Spain showed little interest. The distances were immense. The indigenous peoples resisted. The land offered neither silver nor dense populations to exploit. For more than a century and a half, Texas remained beyond the Spanish frontier. Then France changed the calculation. In 1685, René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de la Salle, missed the Mississippi Delta and landed instead at Matagorda Bay. His Fort St. Louis colony struggled in alien territory. Disease struck, food ran short, hostile groups attacked. Within 4 years, the settlement had collapsed, but the threat it represented lingered in Spanish minds. A foreign power had planted a flag in territory Spain claimed, but didn't control. Madrid responded with missions and soldiers. Franciscans moved into East Texas in 1690, building outposts among the Cayuga peoples of the Hasin Ai Confederacy. The first attempts failed, indigenous resistance forced withdrawal. When France established Louisiana in 1716, Spain tried again. In 1718, Spanish authorities founded San Antonio. It became the first civilian settlement, a presidio and mission complex anchoring a vast territory the Spanish called Nuevas Filipinas. Yet even with this foothold, Spanish Texas remained one of New Spain's most thinly populated provinces. Missionaries counted converts, soldiers guarded supply routes, but the Comanche controlled the plains. For decades, Spanish expeditions ventured north and west only to retreat. The distances defeated them. In 1785, Spanish officials negotiated a treaty with Comanche leaders, trading goods for peace along certain corridors. The agreement angered other peoples, reshaping alliances across the region. Still, Spanish authority extended only as far as garrison walls. By the early 19th century, mission bells rang in a handful of settlements. San Antonio held a few thousand souls. Nacogdoches marked the eastern edge. Between them stretched hundreds of miles, where Spanish law existed on parchment, but not on the ground. The empire had claimed the frontier 3 centuries earlier, yet the frontier had never truly yielded. In 1821, Mexico won independence from Spain. The new nation inherited an enormous northern frontier it could barely control. Texas, part of the state of Coahuila y Chiapas, stretched across territories larger than most European countries, populated mainly by Comanche bands who moved freely across the plains and scattered communities of Tejanos, ranchers clinging to the river valleys. Mexico City faced a problem. Comanche raids devastated settlements. Distance made governance nearly impossible. The solution seemed logical: invite settlers to farm the empty lands, create a buffer against the raids, and build a tax base. The government liberalized immigration laws and granted vast tracts to empresarios, contractors who recruited colonists in exchange for land rights. Stephen Austin became the most successful empresario. In 1822, his first group, known as the Old 300, established farms along the Brazos River. The land grants were generous, soil proved fertile. Word spread quickly across the American South. What followed was demographic transformation on a scale Mexico hadn't anticipated. By 1834, the population had exploded to roughly 37,800, but only 7,800 were of Mexican descent. The ratio had inverted. The settlers Mexico invited to populate its frontier now outnumbered Tejanos nearly 5 to 1. The newcomers brought assumptions Mexico hadn't bargained for. Many were slaveholders from the American South. Mexican law prohibited slavery. The settlers ignored the prohibition, reclassifying enslaved people as indentured servants through legal fictions. They attended Protestant services despite requirements to convert to Catholicism. They conducted business in English, not Spanish. They looked south towards distant Mexico City with growing resentment over taxes and governance. Mexico recognized the danger too late. In 1830, the government prohibited further immigration from the United States and stationed customs officials to enforce trade laws. The policy enraged everyone: recent immigrants who wanted family to join them, Tejanos merchants whose businesses depended on American trade, and settlers who viewed Mexican authority as illegitimate interference. Tensions ignited at Anahuac in 1832. Settlers clashed with Mexican garrison troops over customs enforcement. The disturbance coincided with broader upheaval. Mexico itself was fracturing between federalists who favoured regional autonomy and centralists demanding stronger national control. Many Texians sided with Mexican federalists, framing their resistance as support for constitutional principles rather than outright rebellion. Conventions met in 1832 and 1833. Delegates drafted petitions requesting separate statehood within Mexico, more local governance, and exemptions from immigration restrictions. The language remained respectful, the demands arguably reasonable, but the subtext was unmistakable. The settlers Mexico had invited to secure its frontier now sought autonomy from Mexican authority. The irony was complete. Mexico's solution to its empty frontier had created a new problem. It had imported a population that shared neither language, religion, nor legal traditions. It had granted land to people who viewed themselves as temporary guests awaiting better terms, not permanent Mexican citizens. By 1836, 15 years after Mexican independence, the empresario system had achieved its stated goal. Texas was populated, but not by Mexicans. If you're finding value in these reconstructions of lost worlds, consider becoming a channel member. Your support makes this research possible. Now, the contradictions would ignite into open war. In October 1835, Mexican soldiers rode toward Gonzales to reclaim a small brass cannon. The settlers refused to surrender it. When dragoons approached, Texian volunteers fired the weapon across the river. The shot marked the beginning of armed revolt. Within weeks, Texian forces captured San Antonio. A provisional government formed, then collapsed into factional disputes. By early 1836, Texas had declared itself in rebellion but possessed no functioning authority. Mexican President Antonio López de Santa Anna marched north with thousands of troops to crush the uprising personally. On February 23rd, his army surrounded the Alamo mission in San Antonio. Inside, fewer than 200 defenders held stone walls that had never been designed as a fortress. William Travis commanded. Jim Bowie lay ill. Davy Crockett had arrived weeks earlier. For 13 days, Mexican artillery battered the compound. Travis sent desperate messages requesting reinforcements that never came. Before dawn on March 6th, columns of infantry stormed the walls. The assault lasted 90 minutes. Every defender died. Santa Anna ordered the bodies burned. 3 weeks later, on Palm Sunday, General Uria's forces executed more than 300 Texian prisoners at GOH Lee Ad. The massacre eliminated organized resistance along the coast. Panic swept the settlements. Families abandoned farms and fled east in what became known as the Runaway Scrape. The revolution appeared finished. On March 2nd, delegates meeting at Washington on the Brazos had signed a Declaration of Independence. They created the Republic of Texas while Mexican armies advanced across the territory. The document prohibited any future government from restricting slavery or emancipating enslaved people without owner consent. The new republic's survival depended entirely on military victory that seemed impossible. Sam Houston commanded the retreating Texian army. For 6 weeks, he withdrew eastward, refusing battle while his forces grew. Settlers cursed him as a coward. Government officials demanded he stand and fight. Houston kept moving. On April 20th, his army camped near the San Jacinto River. Santa Anna's division arrived the next morning, exhausted from forced marches. The Mexican commander posted no scouts and allowed his troops to rest in the afternoon heat. At 3:30 on April 21st, Houston attacked. His men charged across open ground while Mexican soldiers scrambled for weapons. The battle lasted 18 minutes. Texian forces killed more than 600 and captured 700 more, including Santa Anna himself. Texian casualties numbered 9 dead. The captured president signed the treaties of Velasco, ordering Mexican forces to withdraw below the Rio Grande. The Mexican government never ratified the agreements and never recognized Texan independence. For 9 years, the possibility of renewed invasion remained constant. The Republic struggled immediately, it carried enormous debts, and possessed almost no revenue. Comanche raids continued across the frontier. Mexico rejected all diplomatic contact. The Republic's first president, Houston, sought immediate annexation by the United States. His successor, Mirabeau B. Lumar, pursued nationalist expansion toward the Pacific. The United States refused annexation for nearly a decade. Northern states opposed admitting another slave territory. Political calculations shifted by 1844. On December 29, 1845, President Polk signed legislation admitting Texas as the 28th state. The independent republic had lasted exactly 9 years and 11 months. Its brief existence resolved nothing about the border with Mexico, the status of slavery, or the future of indigenous peoples still defending their lands? Those questions would require violence on a far larger scale. In April 1846, dragoons rode through scrubland, Nantes between two rivers. North lay the Nueces, the boundary Mexico claimed. South stretched the Rio Grande, the line the United States insisted defined its newest territory. When Mexican cavalry encountered American patrols in this contested zone, shots rang out. 11 Americans died in what became known as the Thornton Affair. President James K. Polk had won election on expansion. Texas annexation in December 1845 fulfilled that promise, but Mexico severed diplomatic relations immediately. Polk ordered General Zachary Taylor to the Rio Grande with 4,000 troops. The skirmish gave him the justification he needed. Congress declared war in May. The first battles unfolded on Texas soil. Fort Texas endured a siege. Artillery duelled across grasslands at Palo Alto. Infantry clashed at Resaca de la Palma. Then American armies pushed deep into Mexico itself, seizing ports and marching on the capital. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo ended it in 1848. Mexico accepted the Rio Grande boundary. The United States paid $18 million for undisputed control of Texas and vast territories beyond. Settlers poured westward into cotton lands. By 1860, more than 180,000 enslaved people lived in Texas, 30% of the population. When Abraham Lincoln won the presidency that year, a state convention gathered in Austin. The vote came swiftly. 166 delegates chose secession, 8 opposed. Voters ratified the decision 3 weeks later. Texas joined the Confederacy in March 1861. Governor Sam Houston refused to swear allegiance to the new government. The man who had commanded at San Jacinto, who had served as president of the Republic, was deposed from office. He warned that secession would bring disaster. Few listened. Texas sent thousands of soldiers eastward, but no major battles scarred its soil. The final engagement of the war occurred at Palmito Ranch near Brownsville. A Confederate victory fought weeks after Appomattox, when news traveled slowly across hundreds of miles. Texas's real wartime role lay along its southern border. Goods flowed through Mexico, bypassing Union blockades. Cotton moved out, arms and supplies moved in. The Rio Grande became the backdoor of the Confederacy. When Confederate armies surrendered in Virginia, Texas descended into 2 months of lawlessness. Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston on the 19th of June, 1865. He announced that all enslaved people were free, 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. Juneteenth marks that day. Reconstruction brought violence. Night riders terrorized freed people and white Republicans. Agricultural depression gripped cotton counties. Yet Texas recovered faster than most Confederate states. Its economy had never depended solely on plantation slavery. Cattle ranches sprawled across western grasslands. Lumber camps expanded through eastern forests. Railroad companies laid thousands of miles of track, connecting isolated towns to markets. The state gained a reputation as a refuge. Gone to Texas described those fleeing deaths, wartime hatreds, or legal troubles elsewhere. But legitimate entrepreneurs arrived too, drawn by cheap land and expanding industries. By century's end, lumber had overtaken cattle as the state's largest enterprise. In September 1900, a hurricane struck Galveston. Storm surge swept across the barrier island. Winds destroyed thousands of structures. Between 8,000 and 12,000 people died, the deadliest natural disaster in American history. The port city never fully recovered its prominence. Houston, connected to the Gulf by a new ship channel, would rise in its place. On the 10th of January, 1901, a drilling crew worked a derrick on a salt dome south of Beaumont. They'd pushed through 1,000 feet of Gulf Coast clay when the well began to rumble. Mud shot skyward. Then crude oil erupted in a geyser that rose more than 100 feet into the winter air, roaring like a locomotive as it climbed. The Spindle top well blew for 9 days before the crew capped it, spraying 75,000 barrels across the marsh grass. In those 9 days, Texas changed. Within months, derricks crowded the hilltop. Oil speculators arrived by rail, buying leases, forming companies with names that would outlast the century. Texaco, Gulf Oil, Humble, which would become Exxon. The well that had cost $30,000 to drill produced more petroleum in a single day than all the wells in Pennsylvania combined. The price of crude collapsed from $1.20 a barrel to 3 cents. Farmers who'd worked rice paddies bought motorcars. Beaumont's population doubled, then doubled again. The strike spread. Drillers found oil beneath the East Texas pine forests, under the plains of West Texas, beneath the shallow waters of the Gulf. Geologists mapped anticlines and salt domes, tracing reservoirs that stretched for miles beneath the surface. By 1930, Texas produced more oil than the rest of the United States. The fields required workers, tool pushers, roughnecks, refinery operators, and the industry drew men from cotton fields and cattle ranches into a new industrial economy built on petroleum. The boom reshaped cities. Houston, connected to the Gulf by a ship channel, became a refining center where crude arrived by pipeline and departed as gasoline, kerosene, and diesel. Dallas grew as a financial hub where oil money funded banks and skyscrapers. Fortunes rose from holes in the ground, and the state that had spent a century exporting cattle and cotton now pumped liquid energy from beneath its soil. When the Second World War began, federal contracts transformed Texas again. The government built air bases across the flat interior, training grounds for pilots who would fly over Europe and the Pacific. Shipyards appeared along the coast. Munitions factories converted oil money into artillery shells and aircraft fuel. 750,000 Texans left for military service. The ones who remained worked shifts in plants that ran through the night, manufacturing 3% of the nation's wartime armaments. The farmers who took factory jobs never returned to ploughing. The pay was better, the work steadier. By 1945, petroleum had pulled Texas into the industrial age, and the oil that had erupted from a salt dome near Beaumont flowed through pipelines that stretched to every corner of the state. The derricks kept pumping. Production would peak in 1972 at 3 million barrels a day, but the transformation was already complete. Texas had become what the black crude made it, a place built on what lay beneath the ground. By 1945, the state that began as contested frontier had become something else entirely. Cities spread across coastal plains and prairie where cattle once grazed. Houston's ship channel linked refineries to global markets. Dallas rose as a banking center. San Antonio preserved its missions while building military bases. Austin grew from a government town into a technology hub. The economy that Spindletop built diversified. Aerospace companies located near the coast, electronics firms followed defense contracts. By 2024, 52 Fortune 500 headquarters operated within state borders, more than any state except New York. Export revenue led the nation every year since 2002. Demographics shifted as the Sun Belt drew migration. By 1990, Hispanics overtook blacks as the largest minority group. The state holds America's largest black population, over 3.9 million residents. By 2019, 1,000 people arrive daily. The story contains complexity that resists simple narrative. Indigenous peoples displaced. Slavery embedded in the Republic's founding. Mexican-American relations shaped by war and changing borders. Reconstruction violence. Jim Crow. Disenfranchisement. These layers don't vanish beneath economic success. 6 flags flew over this territory. Each left marks that remain visible if you know where to look.